What's up, guys? This week on the Beta podcast, we had a chance to talk to Piper Kelly. Now, Piper won gold at the 2023 Pan American Games, which allowed her to represent Team USA at the 2024 Paris Olympics. Now, we got a chance to pick her brain about all kinds of things like how important is lifting and climbing? How early is it important to specialize to be an Olympic athlete? And how do you return from such a big injury like Piper did to come back and compete at the highest level? Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Well, Piper, welcome in. I'm really excited for this one. I mean, you got to say, you're the first climber in a long list of climbers going to come in on this podcast, but you're also the first Olympic athlete. So what's been super just racing through my mind last night as I was prepping was, I just got to hear, what was your favorite Olympic memories? It doesn't have to be related to climbing. What was just like something in that highlight reel that's just always going to be there in your mind going forward?
Some of the things that stand out are like the first time walking into the village and, just seeing like the Team USA building was right there. There's people walking around everywhere and, all their country clothes. The first time seeing the dining hall, it has all the flags in front, kind of on a walkway with big Paris 2024 across the top. And so that was kind of a moment like, oh my gosh, I'm like here at the Olympics. Like this is the Olympic Village. And that was really cool. And then also sort of related to the climbing, just like, stepping out onto the stage. And, as I kind of stepped out, I was like, all right, now I can say I'm an Olympian. But it was also just like 6,000 people there, which I'm pretty certain is the biggest crowd I've climbed in front of. And it was a pretty like hype crowd. Like I think, climbing's pretty big in France, but there was also a pretty big turnout of like Americans, it seemed like, and just seeing everyone kind of again holding their country flags and cheering and just excited to be there. And yeah, just kind of stepping onto the stage and seeing the crowd and being like, wow, this is at the Olympics was also pretty cool.
That's awesome, Piper. I'm new to the sport of speed climbing, but I understand it's the same route, which, as you say, you can do with your eyes closed. Is there anything different about doing it on that stage in the Olympics in front of that crowd?
I mean, at its core, no, it is the same route. You're racing someone next to you. So I guess at the base, it's all the same, but definitely like the feelings that you get, I think can be different. And I think that could be both a good thing or a bad thing, I guess, depending on how you take it. But kind of the way I took it was just like, it's basically, extra energy for me and kind of drawing from the crowd, and the excitement could contribute to my own excitement and adrenaline and all these things. But it could also definitely be a distraction, I guess, if you weren't prepared for that or weren't taking it in the positive way that I was trying to.
100%. That makes a lot of sense. Bear with me as I share my screen. I'm going to put something on for you. I got a chance to look through a bunch of your climbing videos and
All right.
apart a couple interesting things that are really cool about climbing that I've just noticed. Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, I can see.
Okay, perfect. So I broke it down into 3 phases, which is really interesting, which is I just find this so unique to climbing in general. But I really had to ask you about it. So this is the first slide. So this is you right when you're up, you're all ready to go. And the buzzer hasn't went off yet and you're not getting ready to go, but you're just there. And I just see this look of like nervousness on your face where it's like, I'm nervous, but also like, I'm excited. As soon as it says, okay, it's time to go, you chalk, the arms are there. And I don't know if you can see your game face, but it just screams game face to me.
Yeah.
Right? This is right before you're about to go. And this is after the wall, which is so cool. You finish, you're coming down and you're totally smiling. For one thing, I would just love to hear, what are those phases like? What are the emotions like? You see the huge crowd of people. Then you're getting ready to go. You chalk, you do your like pre-mental ritual and you're just game face, you're on. And then as soon as you're finished, you're just full of joy. You're laughing. You're probably looking at like your coaches, your buddies, your team. And I would really just love to hear what's going through your head through those phases.
So I guess the first phase, when you're facing the crowd, you're getting chalked up, getting clipped in, and then waiting for them to say at your marks. It was the longest that I've ever like faced the crowd in a competition, just because they did longer intros. I mean, I think usually they do announce our name, but they kind of did a big like, and on the left, Piper Kelly, we're representing. Like, so it was definitely longer that we had to face the crowd. So had more time there, which I actually kind of, because I do have kind of some mantras and stuff that I say to myself, and it kind of allowed me to get like all the way through those. But Yeah, at that time, I'm trying to like stay excited. I was seeing my friends and family in the crowd, which I hadn't actually seen them yet in Paris. So I was like seeing them for the first time in a while and running through my mantras and yeah, just basically trying to be as excited as possible at that point in time. And then when it's the at your marks, that's when we turn around and get to the wall. And then I still am like kind of running through some things in my head, but it's less, I guess, excitement focused and more it's like, okay, like you got this. Now it's time to go. Like kind of this is the time. Then you can even sit there and be like, all right, in 8 seconds, like I'm gonna be down. It's gonna be over. And so it's like, right now is the time to make it happen. So that's kind of one of the last things I say to myself before I get on is like, all right, you got this. Like let's go get it. And so that's I think more kind of the game face, like get after it attitude. And then, as soon as I'm done, it's like, it's fun. Like the crowd's cheering, especially if you did a good lap. But my first one was actually what I was calling a PR, which PR is personal record. That's kind of how we keep that. But the PR was post rupture because I actually pretty severely injured my finger 4 weeks before the Olympics. So that was the fastest time I had done post rupture of a pulley in my finger. So I was just psyched. I mean, the wall was good. The holds were good. They all are the same, but sometimes walls can be more slippery than others and stuff like that. So I was just like, as I'm lowering, I did my lap. I'm like, all right, now I'm officially an Olympian. So kind of right back to just having the time of my life.
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, what's so cool about that is how flawlessly you just went between looking at the crowd, everything's there, and then you just went game face. That's got to be the craziest thing I've seen. I was like, wow, I can't believe you shifted that quickly. The stark difference in your appearance from you're looking around, you said they're doing long intros, which probably just really nerve wracking. And then all of a sudden it's game time. I got this. We're good. I thought that was super sick. So I got a chance to read a little bit about you in the Britannica, and they were writing a little bit about your past and the injury. While training for the IFSC Climbing World Cup in 2019, so that's International Federation of Sport Climbing, Piper suffered a partial shoulder dislocation. After consulting several doctors, she decided to compete at the event. However, she ended up pulling out at the end of the first round after suffering 2 more dislocations. Over the next year, Kelly estimates she experienced more than a dozen more partial and full dislocations. She decided to have surgery in 2020 amid the COVID-19 pandemic, which caused the cancellation of most sporting events. She then spent close to 2 years recovering and rehabilitating her shoulder. He returned to competition in the Climbing World Cup in May 2022 and finished 15th. She competed in several more international competitions over the next year and a half, but placed mostly in the 20s. It was at the 2023 Pan American Games, and Kelly broke through. He then set a personal best competition time of 7.52 seconds and earned a gold medal. With the victory, that secured your spot for the U.S. team of the Paris 2024 Olympics. So talk about movie-like this plot here. So much has went down. You had surgery, you rehabbed, you came back, won the gold at Pan American, which is just crazy, and got your spot. We've seen it so many times at a high level, but coming back from injury it's not a joke. There's so many things that go on physically, mentally in your head. I would just love to hear, just to start as we dive into a little bit of the injury segment, what was it like? How could you give other people advice? Maybe you're going through the same thing and want to compete at a high level like yourself. Or if Piper could do it, Piper's an Olympic athlete. How the heck did she do it? Could you give some advice to maybe some other people and talk us through what happened?
Yeah. So as you said, the injury first happened in 2019, but the surgery didn't happen until 2020. So that was kind of during COVID anyway. So maybe that made some of the things easier. Like I didn't feel like I was missing out on competitions. Gyms were closed, competitions were canceled. But with COVID, and I was also in my sophomore year at college, I kind of did give myself maybe 6 months and even close to a year before I really got fully focused in on training and competing again. I did kind of always say I still wanted to go for the 2024 Olympics. I kind of said that throughout that whole time, but I definitely wasn't training for that, which maybe I could have recovered faster if I would have been fully doing everything I could the whole time. But, I first made the US team when I was 16 years old. So I'd been climbing obviously to get to that level for longer than that. So I'd been kind of at a high, like elite level of sport for already like 4 or 5 years at that point in time. And in climbing, we don't really have a ton of off season because, we have our international season kind of starting March or April and running through October. And then we have our national season, which you kind of have to do to qualify for the international level, usually November through March. So, I mean, that just pretty much named like every single month of the year. So I feel like I really hadn't had time off in like 5, 6 years. So I kind of wasn't going to the climbing gym and, in college, made some friends outside of climbing, which in high school, I'd say most of my friends were in climbing. But, looking back again, I maybe could have recovered faster, but I think it was important to have that time because I think it really did allow me to reset physically, but also mentally. And when it was time to kind of get back into training, I was able to do that like 100% as opposed to maybe running at 50% that whole time. And then when it was really time to get after it again, already being on a lower battery. My advice would be to not feel guilty about not wanting to be in the gym or not force yourself to burn yourself out or push past stuff early on in the injury, especially because it was going to be like a year. If I would have pushed hard in those first couple months, by the end of that year, I maybe would have been burnt out. So yeah, take it easy on yourself. Injuries are hard, physically, but also mentally. I was going from top in the country to not even able to use my arm and getting back into climbing, like going from running 8 seconds at that point in time in the speed route to not even be able to get to the top. So it's definitely hard mentally. And so I think, yeah, give yourself some grace there and allow yourself to take that time off if you need it and to kind of get back into it at your own pace.
Piper, besides time off and kind of listening to your body and taking guilt-free rest, what is injury recovery and injury prevention like for this sport? Your knowledge and strength and conditioning to be more durable so that you can continue to compete and avoid things like this occurring?
I'd say the biggest things in climbing are fingers and shoulders. Elbows would also be up there. So yeah, really, instead of like I like to just call it kind of a prehab or injury prevention. And, personally for me, I think like the big lifts are more fun. I'd rather like load up a barbell and, squat heavy than do like my little shoulder exercises. But kind of finding a good way to include those, whether it's in your warm up or just like a cool down, but just really making that like part of the program, wherever you're getting your program from, like making sure that's actually written in and not just like, oh, I will do it. Cause I feel like if it's not, for me, at least if it's not like written down in my program, then I'll tend to like skip it a little bit more. So yeah, making sure that like I'm always doing fingers, shoulders, elbows. They don't have to be a ton of things, 2 exercises, maybe 2 sets, 3 times a week or something for each of those areas. But yeah, just making sure that effort is put into including that into your program, whether it's in the, for me, off the wall or on the wall. Like fingers, I can just do my finger prehab/rehab as my warm up for climbing because I need my fingers to be warm anyway to get on the wall. So that could be in there. And then, same thing kind of for shoulders. I need some certain ranges of motion and some muscles to be activated in order to climb well anyway. So I can just do that in part of my warm up. And, I'm climbing 3 or 4 times a week anyway. So then I'm automatically getting those in as many times as I need a week.
That makes a lot of sense to me, having rehabilitation exercises and activation exercises to warm up for climbing. When it comes to actually improving your performance on the wall, how big of a role is strength and conditioning compared to just time spent on the wall? You mentioned program. What would be like a zoomed out view of a program? How does the gym complement the actual climbing aspect? What does that look like? How does it come together?
Yeah, so speed, especially more so than the other disciplines of climbing, the gym is very important. Depending on where you are in the season, it would have more or less importance. So right now, kind of off season, I'd say like more than half of my time is spent in the gym and off the wall. That would be definitely very much in the off season. So right now it's maybe like 60/40 for strength and conditioning, 40% on the wall. As it gets closer to competition, it would go more 50/50, 60/40, so on until in season, I'd say it's more like 80/20 for 80% is on the wall, 20% is off the wall. But again, kind of more so compared to the other disciplines in climbing, you will see speed climbers, like I said, loading up a barbell, we're doing heavy back squats. We're doing kind of weightlifting. So we're doing clean snatches, stuff like that, where the other disciplines of climbing, like they've probably never been under a barbell in their life. So it definitely is more important. Like you need a certain amount of strength in order to be on the wall like possible. Because as we said, like the climb never changes, but the way you do it can change. And so we call them betas. You can progress to harder betas or just way of doing it. And they're harder and they're faster, which is why we do them, but they are harder to do. And so if you're not strong enough to make that beta work, there's only so much you can do on the wall. Like they're definitely, you can tech your way out of it and really work on the technique. But I think, yeah, at a certain point, if you're not strong enough to make a certain beta work, then it'd be a better use of your time to spend some time in the gym, get stronger, and then come back to that technique when you're actually ready for it. And I think the balance would be different for every athlete, kind of depending on where you are in that spectrum. I'd say I'm already like one of the stronger female speed climbers. I think I have more of a history of lifting weights. I started younger and enjoy it a lot more than maybe some other climbers. So I'd say I'm already on the stronger end, but I think some other younger athletes, when they're just getting into it, I think they could really benefit from spending some time in the weight room and getting some strength, and as well as kind of stability and durability there.
I love that little saying, the wall doesn't change, but the way you do it does. I think that's really cool and fascinating. And it reminds me of when you get to like the pinnacle of your sport, you can get 90% of the way there with 10% of the effort, but to get that last 10%, it takes 90% more effort.
Yeah.
And in a zoomed in perspective of strength and conditioning, are there any movements that specifically translate to the wall that are worth mentioning more than others?
I'd say, especially when we get close to in season, like the most specific exercises are plyometrics in general. We're either doing plyometrics with low ground contact time. So maybe that's like depth to broad jump or like single leg bounds or like repeated broad jumps, stuff for hitting the ground and getting off quick. We're looking for like 2/10 or less, because that's about what our contact time of our foot on the wall is on average as we're climbing, is about 2/10 or less. Output. So doing the max box jumps. One of my favorite that we do a lot is max box jump off seated. So that is incorporating the low ground contact time. So I kind of rock back and then my feet hit the ground and I'm trying to get off as quick as I can, but more so it is like a max broad jump. And we do hurdles and stuff like that. I'd say those are kind of the two biggest ones, is low ground contact time or just max output. And there's not necessarily one specific exercise that is the most important there.
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. That's super cool. I wish more local climbing gyms had speed walls. I'm out in California, up in like NorCal. I don't think anyone has a speed wall. It's pretty rare to hear, mostly bouldering top rope. What's so cool about what you just said there is you said a couple interesting things. You climb around 3 to 4 times a week, and probably you're climbing to strength and conditioning ratio somewhere either 60-40 or 50-50, depending on where the year is. So doing a little crowdsourcing for this, I was asking people, hey, how much do you think the Olympic speed climbers train actual on the wall climbing? And what I noticed was a novice climber would probably say 7. And somebody who's climbed for a long time but also lifts a little bit said about 6. Still pretty high above what you're climbing. I just thought that was a really cool call out there. When you said 3 to 4, I was like, wow, that's a pretty big stark difference there. I think that the tendency maybe at the local climbing level is that Olympic athletes could handle such crazy high loads. And it's cool to hear that you're actually not climbing at like a crazy high days per week. Probably what you're doing is extremely high level compared to maybe what a normal person's doing. But I thought that was just a really cool call out there. You're also an exercise science major in college, so you're probably going to figure out really quick which tree I'm going to be barking up next. But I'm also going to read another part from the Britannica, which I thought was really cool, interesting, and part of some conversations we've had past on the podcast. Piper started climbing with her dad and uncles when she was 7 years old. She found it exhilarating, but few others her age shared her passion for climbing. This led Kelly to focus on more mainstream sports, including volleyball, soccer, track, and cross country. However, at age 12, Kelly returned to climbing and joined a competitive team. I asked around and I was like, well, hey guys, how long do you think these Olympic climbers have climbed for? And they're like, from as soon as they could climb on the wall, they must have been climbing. Now, what's really cool is you've been so successful and you started like officially competition climbing at 12. And you've played so many mainstream sports, volleyball, soccer, track, cross country, not necessarily climbing related sports that we've seen other climbers do. I would love to hear, as Piper, how do you feel like those sports have changed and put you in the place you are today? Do you have any thoughts on if other climbers should be playing other kinds of sports and cross disciplines as well, or specialize in climbing? I'd love to hear your thoughts on all that.
Yeah. I guess first I would say like I did do other sports kind of all the way through high school, but just only for like a year. Essentially, they all got to the point where I had to choose between them or climbing just because the time commitment was enough that like I had to choose one and I always chose climbing. And I guess in climbing, I competed in all three disciplines, which are boulder, lead, and speed, up until my shoulder surgery. So I actually did make the youth US team a few times in the other disciplines as well, and the adult team in the other disciplines once as well. So I think even though it is all climbing, still competing in all three of those kind of kept away from maybe some of that like hyper specialization, which I think is good to avoid like specializing too early. I guess the biggest reasons I would think of is just burnout, both mentally and physically. And then just also like overuse injuries. I guess this would kind of be like the physical burnout. But I mean, especially with something like speed where we're doing the same. I mean, it's 20 holds, approximately 15 moves. Again, it could be more or less depending on which technique you're using, but we're doing the exact same thing like every time we come to the gym. And so with that, the overuse injuries can definitely become a problem and something we have to, actively work to avoid. Doing some of the other sports or other types of climbing can help kind of avoid that because you're still like working those muscles and making them stronger, but not doing it in like this very specific movement pattern that we get in speed. And like you said, it was nice growing up to be able to do those other sports as well because, that's what my friends in school were doing and what my neighbors were doing. And I definitely did have friends at the climbing gym, but yeah, it was nice to be able to do something with my friends in school and maybe kind of avoid some of that mental burnout there. Sort of along those lines, I just got this off Instagram like yesterday, but I think Team USA posted it. I forget the exact number, but more than half of the Team USA Olympians, like in Paris this year, did another sport all the way up until college. I thought was interesting because I think people, even me, maybe a little bit, do tend to think of like, okay, if you're an Olympian, you probably started at like 2 years old, which is true in some cases. Like one of my teammates in speed climbing, Zach Hammer, he's the youngest of three. So his brother is actually my age. His sister is my sister's age. So we grew up climbing together. He's from Michigan. I'm from Indiana originally. He lives here in Salt Lake with me now because his brother had already started climbing by age 8. Zach was 2 years old. So he did start climbing at 2 and pretty much only has done climbing, but he did not choose to specialize in speed till like last year. And he made the Olympics this year. It does show general athleticism, just kind of general muscle development, like knowing how to use your body, like proprioception. So being able to move and be aware of your body and space. Like those are all really important skills that you can develop in almost any sport. So I think doing those and trying out different things is good to develop sort of more general skills and general fitness as a young athlete. And then you can choose to specialize once you start to get into, late high school or even college.
Hey guys, quick ad break for you. If you're a professional who climbs and you work a 9 to 5, we would love to help you get better at climbing. It's completely free. We have a new newsletter coming out where we break down episodes just like this one. Plus, we reach out and get insights from the best coaches in the world to help you get better. It's completely free. If that's your style, I'm going to leave a link in the description below to join, and you could join that email list. And if not, no worries at all. But we'll get right back to the episode.
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. One thing you mentioned, which was really cool, is you spent a lot of time doing bouldering and lead and speed before you actually specialize in speed. I would love to hear now when you guys train on the team and, other of your team members, do any of the disciplines ever cross mix just to train the other one? Like even today, is there like one discipline that does, more of the other or more or less? I would just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, boulder and lead are definitely more similar than speed. So in Tokyo, all three of the disciplines were combined. You had to do boulder, lead, and speed, which was something that nobody had ever done, at least at that level. Again, as a youth athletes, I'd say a lot of people did do all three until they aged out of youth at 18 years old. But at the World Cup level, you did not see anyone entering in all three or, making semifinals in 3 or finals in 3. but that's just the way it had to be. And, for Paris, speed was separated, but lead and boulder were actually still together because their training just does overlap a little bit more. Their climbs always change. So anytime they step out onto the mat, it's their first time seeing this climb. So with that, like the problem solving and kind of learning and thinking on the fly is a lot more important. Whereas for us, all of our problem solving is done in the months of training, like leading up to the event. When we step out onto the stage, like we know exactly what we're going to be doing. Just need a bigger movement library because with the climb always changing, there's literally thousands of possible moves you could be doing. And each year, the setters or the ones that create and put the climbs on the wall are coming up with new moves. So they just need to continue to build this movement library and kind of then be able to turn around and recognize if they see a certain type of hold or a certain sequence of holds and be like, okay, I don't know exactly how this is going to be, but it's probably going to be some variation of a cross or like a coordination, like kick, something like that. Whereas again, we have a very limited kind of movement library that we have to pull from, and all of that is done in training. So yeah, lead and boulder, there's still some difference. Lead is more endurance based. You're on the wall for usually 4 to 6 minutes, whereas boulder it is more kind of power and strength based. Those are just the shorter walls where each attempt is probably less than a minute and honestly probably more like 30 seconds. So there is some overlap, I guess, with boulder and speed as well with that kind of power and strength focus, but just the training for speed needs to be so specific that boulder training or lead training really won't do much for me on the speed wall, apart from just general, I guess, strength. If your fingers are weak or your shoulders are weak and you need that, then that would be helpful. But once you get to the high enough level, the bouldering isn't really going to help you on the speed wall at all. Doing some bouldering could benefit your lead climbing, and doing some lead climbing could benefit your bouldering. So, but we are hoping in LA, it sounds like all three will be separate. So that is exciting just because that is, I guess, the core of the sport is people did tend to kind of pick. We do have like our standout stars, like the Olympic champion, both from Tokyo and Paris, wins World Cups in both disciplines, boulder and lead all the time. But she's sort of like the Simone Biles of climbing, and she's just like that much better than everybody. So you definitely do have some of those athletes that excel in multiple of them, but I'd say more so we tend to have specialists.
With these different avenues in the world of sport climbing, what are the paths that a young athlete can look toward to make a living out of it? And how competitive is that to make it happen?
Right now in climbing, I'd say there's very few athletes who are making a living just off of climbing. And to do so, it needs to sponsorships, about $3,000. And depending on what federation you're coming from, you may or may not be covering your own cost of travel and stuff like that. So, if there's a World Cup in Europe and you win and get 3,000, that if you're coming for your travel, you'd probably barely break even there. So you're not getting almost anything from comps. And, my brother's a cyclist and I have a few friends who are runners out here. They can go to a race like every weekend, even within driving distance. That maybe there is a little cash purse, like even if it is $1,000 or less, there is that option almost every week. If you wanted to, you could go to that. But in climbing, we don't have that, especially in speed. The only competitions I do ever are national championships, our national team trials, World Cups, World Championships, Pan American Games, and now the Olympics. Like I have pretty much never been to just a locally hosted speed event. So yeah, if you're making a living from sponsors, it does have to be, or making a living from climbing, it has to be from sponsors. So then you can kind of get those sponsorships kind of two ways, either just performing well on national or international circuit or social media. I think that's growing in pretty much every aspect that social media is becoming more and more important. We do have some people that maybe don't necessarily perform as well in competition, but they have like a really good social media following. And so you can still get an income that way. But I'd say the vast majority of climbers also work. So I work also as a coach, very minimal, like definitely less than 20 hours a week, probably more like 10 or 15 hours a week, because it just sort of supplements any income I'm getting from sponsors. But yeah, a lot of athletes work as a coach or maybe as a social media manager for a brand or just at their local climbing gym, like front desk or setter or something like that. The vast, of competition climbers are also having to do something like that, at least in the US. I can't speak for sure in other places, but that's the case in the US.
Thank you for sharing, Piper. I'm curious about coaching.
Mhm.
Has sharing your knowledge and experience with athletes transferred to helping you as an athlete at all? The act of coaching, has that improved your climbing in any way?
Yeah, I love coaching. Even if I didn't have to for income, I would definitely still coach. And I think it is very helpful. I think we all have heard of the concept that in school, you don't really know a subject until you can explain it to someone else. I'd say the same thing can be said for sports. Finding ways to break down these complex movements and skills into step by step really makes me like I really have to understand the movement in order to do that. And in climbing, as well as I think in other sports, finding cues are really important because it is super complex movement. And in speed, we're going really fast. So you can't think of everything like all at once. I like to find these very simple cues that I can say, like, for example, like one that I really like is what I just call like ballerina toe. But there's a move that's like a really big move and we're looking to get triple extension, right? But a lot of climbers don't get that extension in their ankle. So they're not using their calf. But instead of thinking like, okay, on this move, make sure you're getting triple extension. Like they can't think of that on the wall. So we just say like, I want you to get your toe pointed. Like think about having like a ballerina toe. Like all of a sudden that's way easier to think about on the wall. Sometimes I'll find a cue because not every cue works for every person. So sometimes I got to be creative, like, okay, so this isn't working for you. Like, let's try this. Maybe all of a sudden for somebody, this cue will click and I'll be like, huh, maybe I can try that with myself. So I think, yeah, both being able to break down the movement as well as maybe get creative if you run into a problem that they're having trouble solving and having to think of other ways to solve it. Sometimes I can then take that back to my own training and apply it and it'll help me as well.
Love that you reference triple extension. I have been coaching fitness for 13 years and I find myself often coaching the Olympic lifts. And I see other coaches that I have a lot of respect for using terms like triple extension to your average ordinary person.
Yeah.
And it doesn't click.
No.
And I find simple layman communication to be what's most effective for the average athlete, which may not be the most impressive terminology from one coach to another, but the efficacy is what matters. And it does make you better as an athlete just
Mhm.
to be able to understand it yourself. When it comes to your coaching, who is your ideal client? Are you coaching people who are looking to do this competitively at a high level? Are you coaching your everyday person? And where do you thrive the most as a coach? What do you enjoy the most?
Yeah, I would say I coach a little bit of everybody. I work as a remote coach, mostly just in speed. That those are maybe our youth athletes, but the majority of my athletes right now, I'd say are like most of them made finals at our youth national championships just last month, but maybe like lower end of finals. So they're competing, but they're definitely not like best in the country or anything like that. But I also coach in person here at my gym in Salt Lake. And I actually do that for it's not just a speed climbing team, it's boulder, elite, and speed. They actually don't compete. It's a non-competitive team and just kind of recreational climbers that are there because they want to get better, but not necessarily because they want to do it in a competition setting. So I feel like I do definitely have kind of the spectrum, but I guess I love competing and I have always been an athlete and a competitor. So I'd say I do maybe prefer coaching competitive athletes, whether that is speed, boulder, elite, maybe a little bit more because it also, I feel like gives a goal and like a time frame that I guess maybe me with my like exercise science brain, I can like work backwards and kind of I feel like make a better program versus just like, okay, like they want to just like get better at climbing in their lifetime. I just feel like is a little maybe harder to like to program for, but that was actually the first time I started working with a non-competitive team or athlete was moving out here. At first it was like a little hard for me. I was like, I don't really know like what to do with this, but I found it does kind of also open up your options a little bit because like, oh, if you want to take a day to just random, like to learn how to like stick clip, which is a technique we use outside for safety, where you clip the first one from the ground using a stick that has like some certain technique to it. It's like, if it was a competition team, I don't want to take this time out of our practice today to learn how to stick clip because we have a competition next month. But if, for example, three of our kids are going on a trip outdoors with their family over spring break, and they want to learn how to stick lift, we can take this time in this class to do that. So it has actually been kind of nice to work with the non-competition team in that way. But mostly what I'm looking for in an athlete is like someone who wants to be there, someone who wants to get better, wherever they are at that point in time. Like, doesn't really matter to me, but it's like, I don't want to be there to babysit. Like, I'm not there to beg you to get on the wall. I want you to want to be there and to want to improve because, that's what I can do best. Otherwise, it's like you're wasting your time, my time, and honestly, like your money. Like, you're paying for an Olympic athlete to coach you right now. Like, you should want to get the most out of that. So as long as they're psyched and hardworking, then, at any level, any goal, I feel like I can work with that.
A couple weeks ago, I was filming an episode in a bouldering gym, and we were chatting about how we were watching the Olympics at the same time. We were like, what just needs to be the norm for the Olympics is you got to have an average person just go up and do the stuff before any of the athletes go, just for perspective. And maybe not every time, but maybe right before the new sports are in. So, climbing's, it's pretty new, right? Pretty new to the Olympics. And I was like, the way, not only just climbers look at it, but just normal people, like, hey, why can't you just like do this? Or, why can't you do this? I'm like, no. This is like far more complicated than you could ever think of. So for the segment of our audience who's never actually been to a bouldering, lead, speed climbing gym, anything, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how little you're adjusting your betas every time, or every time you get on like the speed wall, how much are you like, I would love if you could almost explain that to people who've never done it, how much like little positionings matter in sport climbing.
Yeah. So in speed, it's 20 moves. It's a 15-meter wall, so about 48 feet. It has never changed since it was created, I believe, in 2004. So I've been climbing on it since maybe 2014 or so. And I actually used the same beta from 2014 until last year. I never changed anything. And then last year, I actually changed so much that there's only 2 moves I do that are the same as what I did before. Essentially, when I moved out here to Salt Lake to work with a new coach, we pretty much changed like everything I did, which cut off about a second and a half, maybe even a little bit more than that in that kind of 2-year time frame, which is pretty crazy. That normally doesn't happen to cut off that much time in like that short amount of time. But yeah, once you have your beta, I'd say looking for, I guess, a very minimum would be like 100 reps with it, but probably more like 500 reps with whatever beta you choose. So in the off season, you can mess around with some different things, but yeah, once you kind of decide what you're doing, at minimum, I would want like 100 reps before I show up to a competition ready to do this technique. But realistically, honestly, most of the time it is probably more like 500. I think I probably have climbed this wall. Obviously, I have changed my technique, but I have climbed this exact same wall over 20,000 times at this point in time. I mean, I've been doing it for like 14 years now. So like we have a lot of repetitions with this. You kind of need that many because one, you get 2 chances in qualifiers. So there's 2 lanes, an A lane and a B lane. You're in a random running order. So whoever you're paired against is fully random. It's not based on time or anything like that in qualifiers. You just come out, one climber goes on lane A, one climber goes on lane B. The race itself doesn't matter. It's just purely your time. You come back, do the other lane, they're the same, but you still run on each lane. And your best time is taken to seed you for finals, which usually in World Cups, 16 make finals. And then it's just an all-out race. So seed number 1 goes on lane A, seed number 16 goes on lane B. And then essentially your time doesn't matter because it's just who gets to the top of the wall first. We do have slips happen. So I think that's one thing that's like different with climbing versus, for example, like track and field is you don't see people like slip and fall in the 100-meter dash. I mean, I'm sure it's happened. We usually see in competition, like the highest level athletes really only have like a 60 to 70% success rate. So even though we've done this climb, maybe 10,000 times, we still only have, 60, 70. Sometimes people are getting 80, 90, 100. Those are definitely the best, but mistakes do happen because essentially the footholds are maybe 1.5 inches, like 2-inch kind of wide and maybe about 1.5 inches out from the wall. The entire time we're climbing, we're not looking down. So that's one of the first things we would work on with new speed climbers is once you have the muscle memory, we don't want to ever look down. So not a single time like in the climb am I looking down at my feet. So if you think about that, I mean, we have like a 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch foot that we're stepping on without looking down. If at any point in time you're even like a half an inch to the left, half an inch to the right, half an inch too far out from the wall, you're going to miss that foot. And it can sort of compound as you're climbing. So the first move, maybe you get just like a centimeter out of position. But then that makes your next move like 2 centimeters out. It makes your next move 3 centimeters. Like eventually when you get to the top of the wall, it's going to like have compounded enough that you can make. So you need a lot of reps to get the sort of consistency that we're looking for in competition. And it makes it definitely very intense in competition as well, especially once you get to finals, just knowing that you just have that one chance. And I think we kind of saw how weird that can make the sport with the men's final at the Olympics for speed. We had Sam Watson, American, set the world record in finals, but only finished third. Because in the race to get into what we call the big final, the race for gold and silver, he actually did make a mistake and lost that race. And so he was in what we call the small final, which is the race for that third place position and fourth. Even though in that race for third, he set the world record, he broke his own world record actually, he still could only get third because he had made a little mistake in that race before. And it was even just a tiny mistake. I think he did a 4.93 and his opponent did like a 4.88. So very small margin there. And his world record was 4.75. So even with that little mistake, he was just like, 0.15, about a 10th away from the world record. But that was enough to lose that race, again, by less than a 10th. And then again, even though he set the world record in that final race, he still could only like finish third. So in competition, how fast you are is important, but almost more important is how consistently can you be at your top speed or like near your top speed, because you don't just get like a million chances to try to get there.
That's a wild little nuance to the sport, which if you embrace it, I'm sure it makes it interesting. But 10 to 20,000 repetitions on the same wall is incredible.
Yeah.
How do you stay engaged? How do you keep it exciting? Is it still interesting? Does it get boring? Are there seasons to it?
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it can get boring for sure. I think a couple ways to keep it interesting. One is to learn new techniques. So like we said, there's a lot of different ways to do it. And as you get better and as you get stronger, it kind of opens the door to some of those. So you can always maybe try to learn a new technique. I think climbing with friends is really important. If you're always doing it on your own, then it can definitely start to get boring. But if you have people to race with, people to encourage you, people to cheer you on as you're going, I find, at least personally, that makes a really big difference. So that was a large part of why I moved out here to Salt Lake City. The facilities are better here. There's a coach here, but I was also just training on my own every day. And eventually it just like starts to get old and you like don't really want to be there. But I feel like having a crowd of people to, even if you're lacking motivation one day, maybe your teammate is like extra psyched and you can kind of draw some of that motivation from him. And there's just like kind of an excitement in the crowd or just like your training partner, then you kind of bounce some of that motivation off each other. I'm a pretty competitive person, I guess, probably obviously to do something at this level. But for me, like speed, every time you go up, you hit the timer, you see your time. It's a very measurable progression and very measurable success. So that kind of keeps it interesting on its own for me. Is like not each day is like I'm looking to PR, obviously, but I can kind of walk into each session with like a goal for that session. Sometimes we are just doing like 2 moves and maybe I'm looking to like cut 100th off of these like 2 moves. And so that's like my only goal for the session. And I can just like dive 100% into that. Or maybe I'm looking for like my average time of the session to be better. Like maybe I won't do my fastest, but my slowest of the day will be faster than like the last time. Or, maybe it's just like a pure volume session and I'm just trying to get 30 laps in one day. And I won't time any of them. And I'm just trying to see if I can do 30 laps in a day. So I think because the success and the outcome is so measurable in speed, you can kind of set a goal for each training session. And at least for me, keep it exciting that way because I am so competitive. And whatever I set my goal for that day, I want to make sure I get it done.
100%. That makes a lot of sense. And another discussion I had like a while back was, well, I'll give you a little context first. What got me into like recreational climbing was I tore my ACL. I was like really messed up for a while with my knee and I love playing basketball. I played basketball like a kid growing up. And I noticed a stark difference between these two sports. So my buddy got me into climbing and when I returned from my ACL to the two different sports, I noticed some pretty stark differences. So I returned to basketball, and almost like the vibes of basketball are very different when it comes to sports. So like you miss a shot, people are yelling at you, they're trash talking you, everything's very different. You hit a shot, you're not supposed to say like, someone misses a shot, you can't say like, oh, nice shot, that was a good one. Like that would be considered weird in basketball. That's when you're supposed to like talk smack, stuff like that. I returned to the climbing gym and like everything is so different. Everyone's like encouraging you, encourage other people. And it's so rare for me to meet like a climber who's just not a nice person. Everyone's just so nice in a climbing gym, which is really cool. And almost like the vibes of the sport are so different at like a local level. And we talked a little bit about it and we're like, well, at one point you'd have to come into the gym and look to someone and say, hey, like you're like the model citizen for this gym. How are you acting? Right. Like, you're like the OG. You come here like 6 days a week and you're like climbing and, you're a nice guy. Okay. Everyone's going to be nice. Right. And we look at this model citizen. So where I'm going with this is we finally got a chance to talk to a model citizen of climbing. So, you have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people watching you climb. Right. And you've got to be a model citizen. So I'm really curious when you go out and compete on this stage, and maybe you talk to other climbers in the village, do you notice that same kind of vibe? Like all climbers are just super chill, super nice, maybe on average. Do you have any thoughts on that? I'm just so curious. It's almost been like a thing that none of us have been able to figure out. It's awesome. We love people to come out and climb, but why are climbers just so nice? You ever thought about that?
I definitely have thought about it. I mean, it's one of the things I love about climbing is how community based we are and how friendly we are. I guess I can't say for sure like where it comes from, but I think some of it kind of does come from like the roots of climbing is it started out not as a competitive sport and just like essentially like hippies hanging out in the woods, like climbing rocks with each other. Like out in California, Yosemite is kind of where it started in the US at least. So I think with that background, it has carried over into the competition circuit, which I love. I love that we are all friends with each other and we all encourage each other, whether that's in training or in competition. We really are always rooting for each other, like me against the wall, then me against any person. I'm going to go out there and do the best that I can that day. And I want everybody else to also go out and do the best that they can that day. And just the measure really is whose best is better that day. But yeah, I just, especially because we know our personal best times. We've done this climb 10,000, 20,000 times. I know what I can do and what I care about more than beating the person next to me is doing my best time. Like for example, last World Cup season, my two best finishes in a World Cup were, I think, 13th and 15th. And they were actually two of the slowest times I put up. It just so happened that competition, they were actually both here in the US. I think maybe less European and Asian athletes traveled over. The wall here is actually quite slippery. So this is one of the most slippery walls that we run into on a competition circuit. I get to train on a little bit more living here, my two best finishes. But my favorite competition was one that, maybe I don't even remember what place I got actually, like somewhere in the 20s. So not my best finish, but it was the best time I did in competition. So I feel like maybe that kind of shows how I don't really feel like it's me against anybody. And like my placement, I don't almost care about as much as I do like the time I put up on the wall. And the only person that has any control on the time I put up on the wall is me. I also want everybody else to kind of have their best time possible. But yeah, I really love that about climbing. And I think it is true. Even other countries, World Cups, like Olympic level, all of that, you still see that same sort of community based and friendly, like good sportsmanship, just cheering each other on. Like you see that anywhere you go in climbing, which I love.
It really goes back to where we started with that picture I took of you on coming down the wall. As soon as you finish, you saw your time, you're just like smiling. Usually that's like a feeling that's, I see a lot, like a lot of climbers, like as soon as they finish, they're just smiling. They're having a good time. They're like, it's like you look at the finish in a bunch of other sports. Usually like if we go back to basketball, you finish, you celebrate on the other person. That's usually like what it is, right? Like you're hitting the celebrations, you're doing stuff like that. Yeah, I think that's super cool. I think that's awesome. I think I read a study about it once. I just don't want to butcher whoever it is because I don't remember their name. So what I would love to hear, Piper, is 2024 right now. I would really love to hear next 4 or 5 years, maybe next 10 years, what are you excited about? What do you have on your mind? What are you excited to take down? I'd really love to hear What's your plans coming up?
I definitely still want to keep competing. I do plan on pursuing the 2028 Olympics home games, so that'll be fun. We'll meet with my coaches probably in the next week or two to start to build out that 4-year cycle and get some competitions on the calendar to get ready for that. I mean, it's 4 years out sounds like a long time, but it goes fast. So I'm excited to get going with that again. Outside of climbing, I have my bachelor's degree in exercise science, but I would like to get my CSCS certification. So at some point, I'll probably start studying for that test. I would like to get a little bit more involved with coaching, especially maybe in this next year when competition's maybe not quite as much of a priority and I don't have to train and travel as much. So I'm kind of starting this local gym I'm at actually doesn't have a competitive speed team, just like for the kind of local youth climbers. So I'm in the process of starting just a competitive speed team at that gym. I'll probably take on a few more kind of like remote clients as well. So athletes around the country that don't have a speed coach or a speed team at their gym, I can kind of work with them remotely. I'd like to go back to school eventually. I guess I don't know for sure when, probably in the next 10 years. I'm not sure if in the next 5, but I would like to get a master's degree in either strength conditioning, exercise science, sports nutrition, or sports psychology. I'm interested in kind of all aspects of sports performance. So yeah, I haven't decided exactly which direction I want to go with that yet, but I do like all those aspects of elite performance because the eventual goal is, eventually I'll have to retire. I'll be 32 then, but the women's speed Olympic champion this year was 30. Definitely not out of reach at all. But eventually, once I'm no longer competing as an elite athlete, I would love to stay involved with elite athletes as a coach or a psychologist or a nutritionist, kind of one of those things, and still be able to travel and stuff like that. So yeah, that's kind of like long-term, big picture goals, I guess.
100%. That's awesome. And last question before you get you out of here. So you mentioned you make a lot of money through sponsors. I'm sure you're very grateful for all of your sponsors now and everything's great. But I was wondering if we could put it out there. There's any sponsors out there that you currently use, maybe you use a lot of your gear of, would like to use their stuff that don't sponsor you yet. I would love for you to put it out there and see if maybe they're around. They'll help you out and hook you up.
I thought you were going to ask if I wanted to shout out my sponsors I already had.
Well, we should do that too.
Yeah. My shoe sponsor, Evolve, is amazing. They actually are both the shoe sponsors for me, Emma, and Sam. So 3 of the 4 Olympians all climb in these shoes, and they're great. They make kind of custom shoes for us and just like the shoes they sell. But since then, we've started to make a custom shoe, and hopefully we're hoping to get to a point where we can sell that as like a speed shoe through this company, through Evolve. So I love seeing brands that are like excited on speed climbing because at least in the US, speed climbing is sort of not seen as like equal or as important in climbing. So I'm really excited that brands like Evolve are starting to be interested in and really support speed climbers in the US because we haven't seen that really until recently. I guess my other big one is Gnarly Nutrition for supplements, protein, creatine, collagen, electrolytes, all those good things. Very important to training and competing and stuff. So use that every day. I have a lot of, I guess, North Face clothing because they are our USA Climbing sponsor. So they make our USA Climbing jerseys, but then Team USA is Nike. So I recently got a lot of Nike stuff as well. And I like both of those brands kind of clothing for climbing in. And that is one thing I don't have yet, I guess, is a clothing sponsor. So, but I know, yeah, especially Nike is maybe, I don't know if they actually sponsor any climbers yet in the world. They're sort of like a bigger brand. So that might be one that's hard to get. But yeah, I really like Nike's both athletic clothing as well as just kind of streetwear clothing and their shoes and stuff like that as well. So it'd be sick if I could get Nike, but we'll see.
There we go. Well, we put it out there. Keywords yet. So
Yeah.
Piper, thanks so much for coming on. This was a real blast. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It was fun.